I have been fortunate to meet with many CEOs and leaders within the photonic industry. People like Michael Lebby, Milton Chang, and Hans van de Vlekkert come to mind. Today, I am privileged to speak with Fokko Wieringa, Principal Scientist within the Connected Health Solutions Department of IMEC Netherlands. Fokko is a pioneer in developing artificial organs and a recent winner of the KidneyX 2021 prize to develop a smart biomedical module for implantable wearable artificial kidneys. Our discussion today will interest anyone building a medical startup or scale-up. We look at the huge challenges that lie ahead, but Fokko has built a practical international roadmap that I am convinced can be an inspiration to others. And look at how his deep knowledge of integrated photonic systems has helped to accelerate his work for several kidney health initiatives. Let's start by asking Fokko to introduce himself. So who is Fokko Wieringa? You studied at the Northern Light Hogeschool Leeuwarden, correct?
Yes, that's polytechnic. So I didn't do university. I studied electronics, and they were the first in the Netherlands that had the education for medical technology, which was very fascinating, and I liked it very much. So I was one of the first people that were officially educated for medical technologists in the Netherlands, which was very much fun to do.
You were one of from the very beginning of your career, you were very interested in biotechnology, biomedical technology. You also work at a hospital very early in your career. You work at the Rhine State Hospital, correct?
Yes, that's true. At first, it was called Elisabeth Gasthuis, which was already founded by the nuns in 1885 in Arnhem. But later on, they fused with two other hospitals and became the major hospital Rijnstaat in Arnhem. I had a lot of fun there. I did a lot of work repairing stuff, but also inventing stuff and thinking about new patents. Really had a lot of fun there.
That was your first contact with medical devices directly in the hands of medical doctors, which is something that has defined your career, has defined really who Fokko Wieringa is. After 10 years after 10 years working, designing and inventing medical devices, I said playing because you and me have a passion to have fun with the things that we do, and this we have in common. After 10 years at the hospital, then you took the job that really define who you are. You went to TNO, which is a research center very close to the industry, and there you took the job of an applied physics advisor, bringing technology as close as possible to the end user, which is the patient. Many things happened on these 10 years, but for me, one thing that really made you was the collaboration that you had with different research Erasmus Center, for example, different medical research oriented centers in the Netherlands, as well as cancer research centers, institutes, initiatives. Maybe you can tell me a bit about this fantastic 10 years.
Well, part of the job was, of course, helping to write safety standards and performance standards for medical devices. Also to solve weird problems that happened in the field, which learned you a lot, because instead of solving the weird problems of one hospital, I now had to do that from a whole country, which was giving you the most interesting problems after each other. It learns you a lot. Also about electromagnetic compatibility and all kinds of weird things that can happen to production equipment. The most motivating is, of course, working with the driven doctors, the ones that really want to help their patients better. And so they are facing a problem in their trade, and they want to do it better, and they're not satisfied with what they have. And so they want to find out a better way to treat the patient, but also with patients that are highly looking for a better way to cope with their disease. So that is a lot of fun. Yeah.
For me, all in all, you spent 24 years at TNO, which for me is a long time because I would switch my job every 2-3 years. You know that for me, 24 years is truly a lifetime. But when I see your profile and I see that at some point when you were at TNO, you went to the Erasmus MC Hospital in Rotterdam and you did a PhD, which is something that is not common in the industry. Why did you feel that that was necessary to continue your career path towards?
Well, to be honest, we always had this weird phenomenon. If you had a technological idea for a solution, and a firm had to buy into that and invest in that, then always somebody that already had a PhD had to come along with me and say, and nod a little bit and say, yeah, well, yeah, it's an idea that might indeed work. And I thought to myself, you know what? I can do that myself as well. If I get my PhD, they maybe listen directly to me. So that was the biggest motivation to do that. And it was a lot of fun.
Your relationship with Erasmus Medical Center has been, I have followed it. For me, has been spectacular. Could you tell me about what motivated you to have this close connection with the Erasmus MC?
Well, they have the philosophy. I worked with the Thorax Center, which had on one floor we had on one hand the research offices where we thought and wrote and so on. We had some laboratories where we do technical experiments, but on the other side of the corridor we immediately had the animal lab. So we could immediately, at least we had to fill in the forms and it had to be all ethically sound, but we could very quickly test what we thought it would work. Of course, you always find some flaws and then you refine it and go back. And that worked very well. And we had at the 19th floor, which just with the elevator a little bit down, we had a wonderful department with technicians that made all kinds of miracles for you. So, and I'm a technician myself, so I was allowed to use the machines as well, which was unusual. But they are masters of craftsmanship. And so they knew how to do fine mechanics, they knew how to do optics, they knew how to do electronics. And they just helped you to jump higher than you could do yourself. And it was all under one roof. It's still there. And I think they're still making a lot of miracles. And in fact, Erasmus MC is photonics and cardiology. If you want to do anything about photonics and cardiology, you have to go to Erasmus MC because they do the congress worldwide on that.
For me, one of the things that I am amazed about Erasmus MC is the close connection between technologists and pathologists. And that has really made a difference. It is all the research is patient-oriented. And we're going to address this a little bit later because I want to know a little bit of your vision on that. But before that, I realized that time really flies. Can you believe it's already 4 years and a half since you moved to IMEC? I really can't believe it myself. I think it felt like yesterday. Why? The first question, of course, why? Why did you make that the career step? You went from TNO, the most important R&D centers in the Netherlands, to IMEC, perhaps the most important R&D center, I'm going to say the Benelux. Why did you make that change? Why?
Well, I could have stayed at TNO, and I think I surely would have been happy there as well. But you may just have summarized it a little bit better. Huh? So IMEC is even a different league. It's world famous, and it pushes the boundaries really in technology. And I can tell you what. Huh? So one of the questions that you once put to me was, which of your photonics projects you think will have most impact on society? I remember that one.
Yes.
And I thought about that, and I come to the conclusion that the work that I did on solving some bottleneck issues on super clean productions of the optics for ASML's extreme UV lithography wafer stepper, that will probably have the biggest impact on a world scale of all work I did. And you know what? That work I did at TNO, but now I work at IMEC and I can use extreme UV lithography machine that is standing at IMEC to make chips that are, at the edge of what the world can make and solve, to better solve medical problems. So that is funny. I didn't plan it that way, but it turned out that it just went like that. And that is very fascinating.
Me, what is fascinating, first of all, every time I talk to you, I get inspiration, and I'm not the only one. I talk to many people that get inspired just by talking to you. When you were at IMEC, I saw that you were always a networking person, but at IMEC you pushed that to the limit. Your collaboration with the Dutch Kidney Foundation has something that makes everyone proud of just being around you. Could you tell me a bit about this? What was the motivation behind being so close to the Dutch Kidney Foundation, and what do you want to do with them?
Well, that work already started during my TNO days, and we continued it at IMEC with big fun. We have seen a kind of an innovation paradox in the treatment of kidney failure. So dialysis, although it's very useful and it keeps people alive, it doesn't really offer you a high quality of life, and it even doesn't prolong your life that long. On average, a hemodialysis patient lives about 5 to 6 years extra and then dies. So that is still a quite short lifespan to be expected. And the Dutch Kidney Foundation had wonderful ideas on improving the quality of dialysis. And I have helped them ever since to realize that in different ways. By, for instance, very closely connecting with the patient organizations to listen what their problems are, then talk with and look into research organizations to look for key enabling technologies on what can we offer on materials, technologies that are already there to maybe use that to solve those problems. And once we had some ideas, go to clinicians and nurses, but also to the patient associations again and see, is this something that might work? And once they said, yeah, that might be something that we could use, then start building it, but also in parallel, because if you have really a disruptive solution, it's not included in any regulation or standard yet. So you have to also, while building it, go to the standard groups that write the safety standards on these devices and tell about these technologies and make sure that the door gets opened once they're built to really use them. And that worked quite well. And with that approach, we see that we lower the risk for industry to invest. Because industry, of course, it's a huge risk to invest in a complex medical device. It's a large amount of money, and if it doesn't work, you lose a lot of money. But if you have diminished the risk already by getting it accepted in the standards, by knowing that the clinicians will use it, and also if you can have quite a good feeling that this technology will be reimbursed by healthcare insurers, then you have diminished the risk quite a bit, and the investment becomes a much better yield. And this approach works quite well. I mean, the project with the Dutch Kidney Foundation for a portable artificial kidney is the only project in the world that I know of in medical technology where healthcare insurance companies that are normally competing with each other in the market jointly are investing over 8 million euros to develop a product. I've never seen that before.
Why is this exceptional? Shouldn't it be the rule? At the end of the day, we all want to live better lives. Why is it an exception that competing organizations want a product that will make the lives of their patients better?
Well, you have to find the right mix of ingredients to do that. I mean, this innovation paradox that I was talking about existed in the field of kidney replacement therapy for decades. But in a lot of other fields, this innovation paradox is not so much there. So in that case, you cannot make the huge jump forward that we can make here. But if indeed you find a kind of a local optimum in development of medical technology, and you find a way to really make a jump forward, then it is, I think, very wise to have the charity health foundations and patient associations with you when you're talking to the government on regulations, when you're talking to the standard committees, and when you're talking to the healthcare insurers, that this is the right thing to reimburse.
I have really ultra high respect for the people who dedicate their lives to make photonic enabled medical devices. For me, this is the most complex ecosystem in every photonic technology. You compare it with datacom telecom or with space or for industrial manufacturing, nothing compares to this. On one hand, you have the photonic technology companies or the R&D centers developing OCT systems or developing fluorescence microscopy, developing great technology. Then you have the medical companies. I'm going to mention a few, the Stryker, the Olympus, the Philips. Then you have the medical doctors, and at the end, ultimately, the users of this technology. And then you have the patients. And then, if it wasn't enough, then you have the insurance companies, and then you have the regulatory centers. And absolutely anybody who wants to start from scratch, developing an idea, having to go through all this is truly a nightmare. Actually, I would say in most of the cases, it's an impossible trip. So that's why many, many research projects in medical technologies do not reach the clinics. Is there anything that, in your opinion, the industry or EPIC we could do to facilitate this? Because it's very frustrating to see so many innovative ideas not reaching all the way to the patient's lives.
Well, EPIC is already doing a great thing. So you have this yearly meeting that that usually takes place in a hospital, and that is already great for medical photonics. And so there in those EPIC meetings, I really love them. I'm very proud that I helped to establish that yearly tradition.
Yes,
But in those meetings, you bring the mix of the hard technologists, but also the medical doctors, people from charity health foundations, maybe that explain about the problems, or patients that explain about how it impacts their life. You do bring investors to those meetings, which is very important, of course. And I've at least once seen a health insurance company also visiting those meetings. It was even in Erasmus MC, as I recall. And that is already helping a lot. But I love the way that you recently did the mentorship. So the EPIC mentorship is also a very keen move. So behind you, Jose, I see 700 members EPIC. Probably it's already over 700 now.
740.
740. So that is so incredible. You have this huge bunch of knowledge literally behind you, with all these experts that have done things. Now, not all of them may have been in medical technology, of course, but in their field, they're experts. And you have several people within EPIC that have a lot of experience in medical photonics. So this mentorship is great because it offers the entrepreneurs that are just starting out to consult and to ask a few questions from heart to heart. So if you were in my shoes, what would you do? And that is already a great thing. Maybe it should be known more to the people that are members of EPIC that this possibility exists. That could be.
Let's go back to the insurance companies, because I think they play a very important role in this ecosystem, and we normally don't address them very well. I'm not going to mention the insurance company that came to the meeting, but I'm going to say something that he said at the meeting. He said that his job was not to make people's lives longer. His job was to make people live better lives, but not longer lives. And there was a big push for reducing the amount of time that any patient spends at the doctor, at the clinic, that also spends using equipment. So it's interesting to have interesting equipment that can solve problems, but it's not interesting to have it used for the patient for a long time. This, for me, and I'm going to be politically incorrect, it doesn't help innovation. This kind of message is the opposite that what we need to hear. And I would like to see your opinion on this, because for me, it is very important. We need to engage more insurance companies. Is there a way that we can meet halfway, or should we adapt to a future in which it is okay to have people telling us that we don't need to live longer, we just need to stay less at the hospital?
Well, what you want is this is not the place for the biological discussion on what's the maximum lifespan of a human. But we all would like to live our lives as long as possible in a health condition that is allowing us to do the things we want to do. I'm okay with using a walking stick when I'm old. In fact, I have been dependent on a walking stick for a few years, but I lost it again. But that is okay, as long as I can go where I'd like to go within reason, and I can participate in things that I enjoy, and I can live more or less on my own, plan my own life, then I'm happy. If I'm not suffering too much from pain. So quality of life is very important, mobility and having the steering about your own life. Now that is also in the interest of health insurance companies. You don't want to live 3 years extra maybe, but then suffering in a hospital. A Canadian farmer that decided to start home dialysis. So he was consulted and said, but if something happens, if something really critical happens to your system, you're 2 hours flying with the Cessna, 2 hours flying out, which means we'll never be in time to help you. But the guy said, hey, I want to be at the farm that I was raised. I want to be with my grandchildren. Let me take the risk. If tomorrow I fall from the tractor and the mowing machine goes across me, hey, that's also my risk. So I'm willing to take that risk on my own responsibility if it allows me to do the things I want to do in the environment I want to live and spend the time with my friends and my family.
One thing that for me it is important here is that to get reimbursement for any kind of medical product, that medical product needs to have some rules, some ideas. So it has to fill some gap. It's not blue sky research that you have a problem to solve. You try to find the best way. Is it clear, in your opinion, to RTOs at IMEC that are leading innovation in many medical devices, medical wearables are coming along the way? Is it clear to you what kind of things you can tell insurance companies to get them on board as soon as possible?
Well, any device or drug, in that instance, has to fulfill a useful purpose. So it's got to bring bang for the buck. Quality of life is one thing for the patient mostly, but if you in the right way are showing that you can improve the quality of life for the patient so that he or she can stay out of this expensive hospital environment and more or less treat him or herself in the home environment, that's a win-win situation for both, because we don't want to be in places where, like hospitals, we try to avoid them as much as possible. We'd rather be at home or with friends or maybe on holiday, and hospitals are expensive. So if you find a way to solve those two, to combine those two questions, then you will surely have the interest of healthcare insurance companies.
In the last years, you have been quite focused on kidney issues. You met a person that means a lot to the industry. You met William Kolf. And you wrote recently an article called Father of Artificial Organs, the story of medical pioneer William J. Kolf. I would like to know a bit what is your fascination with solving problems with the kidneys and also with communicating them to the whole industry, including in this case, the insurance companies, the medical companies, and even the patients.
Well, Kolf, of course, I never personally met him, by the way. He was he already died, very old, by the way, but I never met him. Yet I'm very fond of what he did. In 1945, he saved the first recorded hemodialysis treatment. He saved the first acute dialysis patient. And he was tinkering on his machine during World War II, hidden for the Nazis. Because it was forbidden, more or less, to use stuff that should have gone to the war effort and for medical research. And he was very convinced that machines could take over the function of organs. That was unheard of in those days. It was totally unheard of. It was a thought, it was a paradigm that just wasn't there yet. So in that way, he was father of artificial organs. He got the idea that it would be possible. He demonstrated it was possible, but he could only save patients with temporary dialysis. So the same kind of category that we now see with COVID, the ones that are very, very critically ill, their kidneys fail, but if they are helped by a machine, the kidneys can pick up again and they can live without dialysis again. Later in 1960, the shunt, the access to the vascular system for frequent use was invented in Seattle, and that opened chronic dialysis possibilities. But Kolff showed that it was possible. In the Netherlands, he didn't get much response. We were building our country up back after the war. So in 1950, he emigrated to America, because there, venture capitalists, but that society was not destroyed. Industry was thriving there. He could get venture capital for his ideas. And he realized with a team in Utah, the first implanted artificial heart ever. That was another one. Jarvik was a student of Kolff. And the heart was just named Jarvik because it was the student from that moment. So the model of the improvement model was called the Jarvik model. So he was a magnificent guy, really, very driven inventor.
He passed away in 2009. He left a big legacy for actually having an improvement in the dialysis system. And yes, you have seen this as a potential. You want to take this over, right? What are your present and your future plans in this respect?
Well, it's not just dialysis. Eh? So I must say that there's more plans that I have than just that. Eh? But for kidney replacement therapy, the suitcase kidney, as we call it, of Next Kidney is about to come out. We're planning at this very moment the clinical trials. But then also for other chronic diseases, at IMEC, we are looking for specific autonomous therapeutics. That means we're looking for ways to have implantables or wearable artificial organs that can help people to improve their chronic health conditions. So not just kidney, also other conditions. And it's the same way, huh? By using miniaturization, you can make stuff wearable or even implantable. Also by miniaturizing the energy consumption. And in that way, you give back people their freedom. Having a wheelchair, we once spoke to a patient that said, I have been my lifelong, since child, in a wheelchair. That was not perceived by me as a handicap, because the wheelchair gave me freedom. I felt handicapped once I had to do dialysis. I had to go to a clinic and was tied to the wall on a big machine 3 times a week for a long time. That made me feel handicapped. And when he got the occasion to do this dialysis treatment at home, he felt liberated.
Yeah.
So the wheelchair, of course, it is a handicap if you have to use a wheelchair. But if you are accepting that and use it, like my daughter also does, then it becomes your freedom, your vehicle to freedom. Let me make a prediction here. What electronics have done the last century for our society and also for medical technology, I believe that photonics will do the same kind of jump forward in the next 20 to 25 years. And coming back to your remark about photonics, so integrated photonics, that is an essential area of interest, because it can miniaturize very complex optical systems from a big lab bench size to an implantable size. It's incredible what we can miniaturize with that. And if we do that, signal quality even increases. And we can give people their freedom back, treating them in a closed loop, maybe with artificial intelligence, that maybe is even doing the job better than now with discontinuous measurements in hospitals and discontinuous conclusions from doctors on a very limited amount of data. If we would have a data stream, which would be continuous or semi-continuous, so with a higher sample frequency, we can make better decisions and fine-tune the treatment better while the patient is moving around.
We are talking now about organs in a suitcase, wearable organs, implantable organs, replacement of organs with artificial organs. And all I think in my head is this easy to certify, easy to validate, easy to approve? What is the time to market? And is there anything that the industry can do to facilitate and to accelerate this? And is there anything that we could have learned on the COVID time, on how fast can the industry, the medical industry, move when there is the right motivation for it?
Well, that is a very, very good question. Yeah? So if we have learned anything from COVID, we had a nice speech from EU Commissioner Stella Kyriakides very recently with the European Kidney Forum on July 18th. She said, if COVID learned us anything, it is that we can cooperate and in that way do the impossible quicker. And that is true, because before COVID, developing a vaccine, that was a totally different span of time, really. Now we have several vaccines. Not all of them are equally good, but we have the luxury of having several vaccines, which would, at the start of this pandemic, would have been hardly believable in that amount of time. And yes, there's a lot of discussion in society, and maybe there should be a lot of discussion in society. We also see that it is not only the rich countries that should be interested in vaccine, we should be interested in vaccinating also the poorer countries. It is in our interest to help also poorer countries to vaccinate well, because diseases know no borders. If anything has been proven by COVID, that's it. And so it is time for mankind to say, like Sting already sang, we share the same biology, but we are divided by geology.
I can tell you one thing, when it comes to doing these meetings at hospitals, we always have medical doctors presenting what they do, and then we have the photonic companies presenting what they would like to do with the doctors. And I always feel that there is like 10 years gap. So when the doctor says, we are just using Raman spectroscopy, the companies in the industry tell them, we had this hyperspectral imaging already with 4K resolution. Why do you think it takes so long to bring a medical innovation to the hands of a doctor? What are the key issues that we could maybe solve to accelerate this?
Well, partly it's regulatory. Like I said, if you have a real disruptive innovation, it is not included in any regulation. It is not included in any standard. But it is also thus not included yet in any reimbursement code. Yeah? Do you have a reimbursement code? Suddenly everybody is interested. So all that stuff has to still be established when you have your product ready. And before you have your product ready to go to market, 10 years go by in the blink of an eye. So because it has to be extremely safe, and it has to be extremely rugged, it has to be extremely reliable, it has to be intuitively operatable. So human factor engineering is also very important in this, especially if stuff goes into the home, because with a professional handling stuff, you can still have some maybe weird operating interface things that it's learnable. But once it goes into millions of homes, then you really have to have an intuitive operating interface. And that all takes a lot of time, but also a lot of investment. And the real big innovations, the real disruptive things usually come from the smaller firms.
Yeah, always.
That's
always.
Many times. And these smaller firms typically don't have that much capital to invest. And I can tell you this: if you would have a disruptive innovation that would totally alter the whole business landscape in a certain medical discipline, and you get this more or less to work, and you maybe go to the first in-human trial, and you show this, what can happen to you is that you get rich, because somebody says, you know what? we're going to buy this stuff from you. Here's $200 million. And oh, that's great. You can pay all your investors, and you own a nice amount of money yourself too. That's great. So you think now it's going to fly. Every home will have this equipment. And guess what happens? It's being put in the fridge. And the reason is that you are disrupting a business model that is very profitable and is very nice. And maybe people don't want it yet. They say, well, let's put it in the fridge. So if in 10, 15 years, our stuff is slowly going down in sales, we'll pitch it up. Can happen to you.
Yeah.
So
but that's not pretty. That's not nice. I don't want to live in that world. I say this many times.
You are living in that world. We all are living in that world.
I live in a world that, I go on holidays. I love going on holidays to places where there are no houses. Anywhere I go, I take my phone and I can order groceries and get them delivered to my mother in the south of Spain, anywhere I go. But my mother in the south of Spain, nor me, get regularly scanned for cancer. And this is the world in which we live in. And for me, it is a sad world. That is there anything that we could do? Because I don't believe in competition. I don't. I know that there are big medical companies, but there is, especially the medical business, is so broad that I don't think medical companies should be worried about their competitors. What they should be is talking to each other and talking to innovative companies more often. The question here is, why do you think there is no, for example, an incubator camp for young startups in medical, as we have it in space, we have it in semicon, we have it in agriculture? Why don't we have that in medical, when young startups can actually interact directly with their system integrators who already validated their systems? Why that doesn't exist? And is competition only the issue here?
You could do this in a kind of a pre-competitive way. So I got many patents, and one thing I learned is you first have to find the right question to solve. The most important thing in research is finding the question to be solved. Because if you ask me a crazy question, I probably come up with a crazy invention. And it still will be new, it will be an invention, and it'll probably work, but it will solve a crazy question. So identifying the real need, the real question, that's one thing. For that, you can use those charity health foundations that are looking into the problem for decades already. Yeah. They know what is the real problem, the pain. Once you know the pain, you can start looking for possible technical ways in which you could find a solution. And once you have that, and you have some key opinion leaders, some doctors that are looking into it and said, yes, that might work, then finding investors is one thing. And I think all governments in the developed world have funding programs. They have granting problem. You can have a grant. You can send in a proposal, research proposal for a big grant. And then hopefully, if you get the money, you can do that research and so on. So what maybe governments should start thinking about is that public money that goes into those grants might get a better yield if startups that are really doing something with that and are beginning to get into a principle that works, are somehow getting some coaching, are somehow getting some protection by keeping the sharks out, by, for instance, people that are part of that governmental funding program that says, we're not just going to give you some money, we're going to give you some advice. We're going to give you advice on how to make contracts. We're going to give you some advice on how to look for your investment strategy. We're going to give you some advice on how to work with regulators and so on. In that way, the governments that invest in those grants would have a much better yield of those grants. And it becomes even more interesting because medical devices are a global market. Medical technology is a global market, also drugs. So the biology is everywhere the same. That means that, of course, all geopolitical regions want to be the best. They all want to rule the world. And okay, that's you're never going to change that. But they all share the same biology. So if you would have one piece of the puzzle, for instance, in America, and another piece of the puzzle in Europe, and yet another one in Japan or Russia, and you would find a way to create co-opetition Because co-opetition means we still have competition. But in the pre-competitive atmosphere, we can work together. You know, probably you go to a restaurant every now and then, you know the Michelin guide. Huh? Yeah, so Michelin was a company, of course, that only went to restaurants and wrote about how people would eat. No. Michelin was a company that made car tires. How on earth did they get the idea to write a guide about restaurants? Well, the idea was very, very genius. Huh? People will drive a little bit more because what means a star of Michelin means it's worth a detour. And a detour means I will sell more tires. See what I mean? So that is a very nice move. Huh? So if you have all kinds of brands of car manufacturers, they will all strangle each other in the market. But they will all agree that good roads, every now a gas station and a service station and so on, are very, very important because all car drivers will need them. So they will agree upon that. And the guys that have the gas, that sell the gas, can be different brands, but they all recognize that it is profitable to be along the highway and to make some rules about safety on gas stations and so on. So pre-competitive co-opetition.
We are a bit out of time, but there are a couple of things I really, really want to ask you as well that are quite important. So one of them is that in the past, not in the past, in the recent years, but also all throughout your career, you gave a lot of importance to optical guided surgery. You have worked very often with different surgeons from different areas. And there was always, for me, there was always a yin-yang. So on one hand, you learn from them. On the other hand, you were educating them. Educating medical doctors it has been always an important part from my spectator seat. Could you tell me a bit about this? What did it mean, optical guided surgery, and how did you push this link with the medical doctors?
Well, image guided surgery is basically the thing. Huh? So if you are a surgeon and you have to operate upon people, your eyes are extremely important, but also your fingers and the feeling this. So if you blindfold a surgeon, nobody would like that, huh? To be having a blindfolded surgeon that would operate upon you. But in some cases, we are blindfolding the surgeons because they are operating, for instance, with an endoscope into the human body. And the endoscope has a camera on board, an electronic camera chip. But stupidly enough, we limit the sight of that camera chip to what we can see, the spectral limits of our human natural eyes. And that is stupid, because basically we are partially blindfolding the camera. It can see much more. It can see a much wider spectral range than our eyes can see. So why would we partly blindfold that camera? The answer used to be, yeah, but then otherwise we get unnatural colors if we are taking that piece also into account. But with the right computers and with the right spectral filters and with some processing, we can use that. So that was my fascination with spectral imaging. And I also, when I was in Erasmus MC and doing this work, I was the pioneer that opened up, showed that you could sense the heartbeat of a person with a camera, and that you could even derive the oxygenation of the blood precisely with a camera. That was science fiction in those days, but now it's entering the clinic, and that is super duper. But also I in those days already built 2 cameras that did it, because I said we have 2 eyes. So what you would want to have is 2 cameras in front of maybe your glasses, small camera on the glasses and a small near eye display here. And you would see hyperspectral with a lot of spectral bands instead of just 3 colors that we can see. You would have a lot of different spectral colors, also outside the normally visible range. You would look upon the signatures of critical tissues and you would enhance those in your near eye display. That was crazy science fiction ideas when I started my PhD, but nowadays it's entering the clinic. And in fact, in Maastricht, they have solved this already partially. Yeah? So a head-worn surgical microscope in stereo with two cameras and two near-eye displays and a computer on your belt that can do all the image processing.
Is the medical doctor ready to wear augmented reality head-mounted displays while operating?
Oh yes, they are, and in fact, they already want now. Once they realize now what can be done with it, they are more or less ripping it out of your hands, and they want to do more with that. And one of my former PhD students, he's still in Maastricht, Maastricht surgeon Rutger Scholz. He once formulated it so beautifully in one sentence of his thesis. He said, "Close collaboration with technicians can turn physicians into magicians." And that is what the driven doctor will see. Once you show, as a technologist, you show what all kinds of possibilities there are with your toolkit, and you listen carefully to the doctor explaining about the problem that he or she wants to solve, and you start really thinking together and interacting closely, then indeed, as a technician, you can turn physicians into magicians. And Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction writer, also said, any technology that is advanced enough will be indistinguishable from magic. But it is true. So at this moment, I think we are grabbing now, electronics is interacting with photonics, is interacting with software that creates artificial intelligence. It can all be very, very much miniaturized, so it can become handleable and easy portable and interface with our bodies. And these are fascinating times because we are at the edge of unprecedented possibilities. And I think that integrated photonics will play a huge role in that. Really, it will. And so it's really fascinating to be part of EPIC and every now and then speaking at meetings with all these experts that are all working to improve the possibilities and to shift the boundaries of what is possible. That is really an honor, and I think also an honor to be interviewed by somebody like you, Jose.
An honor to talk to you for me. Looking back at your career, I was wondering with every profile, but with you especially, if you could go back to the very beginning, is there anything you would have done differently or faster or earlier or not do at all?
If it would have been possible, preferably I first would have studied medicine and then engineering. I don't think it was really possible in the days that I grew up. And when I was young, a study like technical medicine, which is now offered in the Netherlands by TU Twente, but it didn't yet exist. So those were different times.
In the Netherlands, you have touched many people's lives. You have also influenced many different companies' development roadmaps. One of these companies is Quest Photonic Devices. You have been in touch with them in the past. Recently, there has been quite an acquisition and development on that. In general, I would like to ask you, how do you feel there is the current relation between RTOs like IMEC or before TNO and companies innovating in photonics? Do you think there is the right construction for them to focus on the really is unique and maybe trust other people to do other research that are not unique in their expertise?
Well, you mentioned the word trust, and that is key. No matter what you do and which kind of branch you are, if you want to undertake an enterprise together, you have to start with trusting each other. And that is something, well, in order to achieve that, you have to really meet somebody and learn to know each other, learn to know each other's problems, learn to know each other's efforts, and find a way to find a common ground and mutual interest to do things. basically it helps you a lot if you like each other. And for that, you really have to meet people. And of course, I helped a little bit with Quest in the beginning with looking upon multispectral imaging and finding ways to have very, very high spectral separation of camera chips and aligning them pixel to pixel. But they did all of that. The rest, they all of it did them themselves. Sometimes you just have to help a bit in the beginning. And it's good to see what came from that. But you also have to realize that takes sometimes 10, 15, 20 years. That easily goes by. And look upon all the hard work, all the truly, truly hard work that people that have set up a startup company go through to harvest in the end. And it's also very sad to know that many that worked just as hard and had just as good as an idea, but just a little bit less luck, or maybe the timing wasn't right, or some regulations were against them, and they failed. And that is sometimes hard. So I do very, very much respect all entrepreneurs that are starting a business and really are, looking into ways to improve the world while also making a living. And so I can give some advice. Yeah. Epic did once a great thing for me, because they had a meeting at Eindhoven High Tech Campus and a masterclass. And guess who was giving the masterclass? Milton Chang. That was so great. I've been reading Milton Chang's blogs and his articles for many years. And there he was giving a masterclass about entrepreneurship in photonics. That was super. And Epic is doing those kinds of things, and you just can sit as a member in the room and have a direct interaction with a genius like that.
It's one of the people I really truly look up to, but so are you. And I in the beginning I asked you to look back, and now I'm going to ask you to look front. You and me are still young. We have many years of hard work in front of us. Unfortunately, I would like to ask you, if we had this interview again in 5 years, what is your vision? How do you think things in the photonics-enabled medical devices industry are going to change?
5 years is not very long in
10 years.
technology, but 5 to 10 years. Well, I think that our devices will get much more smarter. So they will have much more onboard intelligence, and they will also be better in communicating meaningful events to us. So, because one thing that doctors don't want is to be flooded in a continuous flood of data, just dumb data coming over them. They want to be informed about meaningful events. If everything goes right, only little information is needed. But if things are starting to get wrong, then you want to be informed. And you want to be informed about, hey, for years this all was fine, but now suddenly we're seeing this arrhythmic heart action, or we're seeing certain parameters drifting apart. And that is, I think, a lot of artificial intelligence will probably be transferred from a big blue computer somewhere at the world in a big center. It will be put on a chip and brought to the edge of the internet. So we would have local on-chip artificial intelligence, tiny AI as they also call it, that would already do a lot of processing and a lot of, getting rid of the crap and getting hold of the meaningful nuggets of information. Because gold diggers are not interested in a bank of mud. They're only interested in the nuggets of gold that are in that big river bank of mud. So with local artificial intelligence, you can have much more autonomous devices, because they, even if the internet is gone for a moment, no problem. They have their own autonomous decision program on chip. That is one thing. And of course, for photonics, it's clear. Integrated photonics gives you so much new opportunities. and can make it so very small and energy efficient that you can start dreaming of things that normally would have taken a big laboratory bench full of equipment and now can be done on a single chip.
For me, one thing here before we go to the final part of the interview, one thing for me is very important is that I have seen in the last years there is hypes. So this year, COVID-19, so all of us, we're going to do biosensors. Biosensors that are on a chip and they can be disposable. And then you have seen so many activities going like this year. I think Photon Delta is starting a roadmap, I believe next week on this. 3 years ago, before the pandemic, it was all about monitoring glucose without the need of prickless glucose monitoring. Everyone was involved on this. It was 6 years before, it was all about skin monitoring and trying to find if it's a benign or not spot in your skin. Do you think this constant hyping is helping a reasonably well-developed roadmap? Do you think we can benefit by having societal urgent issues driving us? Or you think that it could be perhaps not that beneficial?
Well, hypes are like a roller coaster. They go up and they go down. And we all start screaming when we go down. So I don't think hypes are the best way to go with. What you need is kind of a persistent approach. Roadmaps, for instance, like, well, if we take the semiconductor roadmap, that is very, very successful. That has proven itself across decades. And that is an approach that even competing industries are still sharing that same roadmap because they believe that it helps them. And it's also none of those competing industries by themselves could pay for the innovation needed anymore. So you have to somehow define who's doing what in order to climb those milestones. And for photonics, we also could use that. Now, of course, I know Carlos was, and you also were heavily involved in photonics road mapping, and I think it's good. It really should be done. But it's not just about writing a roadmap. It's also getting that roadmap, preferably international roadmap, acknowledged by the funding programs of various geopolitical regions, so that they all agree these milestones are very important and that their funding and their grant proposal, calls for proposals, will contain a call for those milestones. And suppose now that from one geopolitical region and another one, two of them, if they would join forces, could make a miracle happen and make this reasonably plausible, then both geopolitical regions should give some money on both sides, and then also said, but now you cooperate.
Yeah.
That would be changing, I think, the world. You could still do co-opetition, but one advantage of medical technology is it helps us all. Let me give you an interesting question then. So we have shown to the world that at least the Netherlands and a lot of other NATO countries, they can cooperate with the United States on a joint strike fighter. So we can work together to make a weapon that can kill a lot of people. Oh, wow, that's great. Wait a minute. So we trust each other well enough to jointly make a machine that can kill us all. Oh, that's interesting. So then I would think that we would earlier trust each other well enough to make technology that can cure us. So if my reasoning is, if we can work together internationally on a military project, which apparently we can, then we even the more should be able to work on a medical problem internationally together as well. And International Space Station proves it. So there are problems that mankind is willing to tackle, but you need visionary leaders that will jump across their own shadows. You may even need leaders that are willing to acknowledge that their predecessor, or two predecessors before, that they politically are opposed to, still did something good on one particular aspect, and they would carry on that. That is requiring leaders that are maybe a little bit more well, intellectual than we have seen sometimes.
Also, international cooperation between countries is a lot easier than between companies in the private sector, because and that has been always the big issue of the medical compared to the military or compared to the space, and that's something that I believe is difficult. But what is also difficult is that right now, and I want to close with this question. Right now, we have a lot of young people who are finishing their studies, and they have really good ideas. This generation now, the people who are now 18, born in the 2000s, has an entrepreneurship vein. They are very happy with starting their own thing. They are very brave. Also, they have less risk because we are in a different economic situation, especially in the Netherlands. And the companies are being started, but very often the also companies are being finished very quickly. I would like to know from you, what kind of advice would you give to this younger generation of entrepreneurs with a lot of dreams, with the dream of wearing shorts in an American kind of style, startup bootcamp? What kind of advice would you give them for their ideas to become eventually problem solvers, lifesavers?
Well, read and watch all the material from Milton Chang you can get your hands on. That's one. Secondly, I would think in medical technology, always keep in very close contact with patient organizations, with the driven clinicians, with experienced nurses, don't forget those, and learn how reimbursement systems work. That is a lifesaver. Learn how reimbursement systems work. Then, for your own personal good, make sure to stay well connected with your life partner, with your family and friends. Do not neglect those people, because they really care for you and they will give meaning to it all. I learned that the hard way. Take that one into account. Then another one, and this is very important. So realize that money is printed. It's just simply printed. But extremely clever people are very scarcely born, and that they additionally also need the luck to grow up in some space where they can have some opportunities. And finding the right teammates, that is the most difficult, but also the most rewarding job. And I think that if you tell this or ask this to people like, Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Milton Chang, they will agree probably with this, because finding the right teammates on a journey, if you start being an entrepreneur, that is really the most tough thing. But it's also probably the key to a huge friendship that lasts a lifelong. Because you know what? If you trust each other in that garage where you started out, then you also still will trust each other when you're billionaires. Because hey, you were friends in hard times, so you'll be friends in good times. That is, I think, the most valuable advice. And I must say, if you're a member of EPIC, you have the advantage that you have access to business reports, you have access to mentorships, you have access to excellent conferences where people that are really knowledgeable will come together. And you have the free service of EPIC that they, one of the things that I like is that you or Carlos come to me and say, you know what, I think you should talk to that person because you seem to have a kind of a common problem, and I think that your technologies might match. And I've done that, followed that advice many times, and many times I saw that it led to something beautiful.